My name is Karen Dilfer. I'm an occupational therapist. I'm from Chicago. That's how Becca and I met. I was working in Chicago, and Becca used to live here. My day job is that I'm a clinician. So I was working with kids all day. I looked in when I got on the computer and sat on the Zoom, I thought, oh, my hair is a little messed up from some of the play we were doing earlier in the day. So I work with kids for a number of reasons, just general development, occupational therapy, sensory integration issues. But I spend a lot of time helping kids learn how to eat, helping families learn how to enjoy meal times. And over the past 10 years or so, I've gotten really, really interested in helping kids with feeding tubes learn how to eat by mouth. My work also led me to start a nonprofit group, the Chicago Feeding Group. We are a 501c3 organization with our mission of supporting parents and professionals who work with kids who struggle to eat. So if you don't know the Chicago Feeding Group, check us out. There's lots of really good resources on demand online, and there's live talks as well. They're discounted for parents. And I'm a founder of the Get Permission Institute. We're going to be talking about a lot of Get Permission principles tonight, but Get Permission is really a way of thinking about supporting kids, and supporting families, and always looking for a child's consent and a child's readiness when it comes to eating. Also, my email's on that slide. You can feel free to contact me if you've got further questions or thoughts after tonight's talk. But when Becca and I were talking about this evening's presentation, she said, Karen, you should tell people what feeding therapy is. And I'm like, no problem. I do this every day. And then I tried to write a little definition for this slide. And I thought, oh, wow, this is actually really, really hard. And I started reading other people's definitions in the literature. And I thought, I don't really like those definitions as much as I like my own. So this is my shot at telling you what feeding therapy is if you don't know or you haven't had experiences with it yet. Feeding therapists work to bring parents and kids together over meal times. And those meal times might look like early breastfeeding experiences. Those meal times might look like a bolus feeding at a park into a little one's G-tube. Or they might look like, having a normal family dinner that you think about, the mom and the dad and the kid, maybe some green peas, right? So feeding therapy can look a lot of different ways. But when feeding therapy is really, really good, it always brings parents and kids together. And I think that's an important thing to think about because so often people like you guys have had pretty hard experiences with feeding. Things haven't gone as planned. You haven't necessarily liked the experiences you've had. Maybe they felt really medical or like procedures. Maybe you feel really sad because this was not the feeding experience that you envisioned or that you dreamed about. But we're going to talk about tonight that when feeding experiences happen, they are opportunities for connection. Secondly, feeding therapy can help parents and other grown-ups learn to offer food in ways that make sense for the child. And feeding therapists can help children learn skills that are going to make them successful eaters. And skills can be things like bringing their hands to the middle, maybe being interested enough to touch something wet or messy, holding a spoon, right? Sitting in a high chair. Those are all things that contribute to success of a person eating. The last thing I want to say is that if you had experience in the feeding therapy world, I just want you to know that a feeding therapist is not there to get a child to eat. The longer I practice, the more I am convicted of this truth that as adults, we cannot get kids to do anything. We can gently support. We can build internal motivation. We can set kids up for success and give them opportunities. But ultimately, kids need to be the ones to think it's a good idea and to feed themselves. Another thing I wanted to say to you all is that there's lots and lots of different kinds of therapy, feeding therapy in particular. And some of the therapy that maybe you've been in or you've seen or you've heard about is really directive, meaning that there is an adult who feels like they're in charge. They're trying to get a child to do something. Maybe there's rewards. Maybe when a child behaves in a certain way, something happens, right? There's contingencies. And that's not what we're talking about tonight. Tonight, specifically, we are talking about one approach to feeding, one school of thought of feeding therapy that we're going to call responsive feeding. And what you should know is that responsive feeding was born out of the responsive parenting philosophy. And responsive feeding is based on a two-way relationship between you and your child. Your child communicates feelings of hunger and fullness, followed by an immediate response, right? Such as you feeding your child or ending the feeding, right? And I'm just gonna say, I have this really pretty definition here, but if you're a parent, you probably know this and you probably feel this, right? Your child cries and you say, "Oh, sweetheart, what's wrong?" And you respond, right? You offer your child a spoon and they go, and you say, "Oh, you didn't want that spoon. Try a different one," right? We are constantly doing our best to interpret a child's behavior as communication and to respond in a way that makes sense, supports the child, and promotes connection. Responsive feeding therapy values autonomy, meaning that we are doing our best to let kids do as much as they can in ways that feel good and make sense for them as individuals, right? So maybe instead of putting a spoon in a child's mouth, maybe we offer that spoon to a child's hand. Maybe we put the spoon on the tray and we just wait a minute for that child to be interested enough to pick it up. We're always thinking about relationships and responsive feeding. We understand that meal times are about way more than the food, right? When you think about feeding your child, maybe even meal times with your family or your partner, there's a huge emotional piece to eating. I could talk about this for a long time, right? Maybe you've had a friend who had a baby and you brought her dinner, right? Or you really like your coworkers at the office and you make them cookies, right? Or you had some moments breastfeeding your child and it was just like, it felt so good and it was so connected and so snuggly and so wonderful. So we acknowledge that, emotions are a huge part of eating. And it's important that your feeding therapist recognizes this and supports relationships. We know that feeding is an internally motivated activity. And again, I think I've already said a couple times, it's not our job as grown-ups to get kids to eat. It is our job to help kids tap into their own internal motivation. And we'll talk about that more as we go. Responsive feeding means that every person should be treated as an individual with their own preferences, their own culture, their own likes and dislikes. And we're doing our best to help kids build competence so they can be competent eaters, right? That they can be independent eaters. They can do it on their own in the best way possible for them as individuals. These specific bullet points come from responsivefeedingtherapy.com. It's a great resource. And they really have written a lot of resources that define what responsive feeding therapy is and isn't. So I'm here to tell you, if you're a parent and you have a child with a feeding tube and you've been in some therapy and it hasn't felt great, like maybe you felt like the therapist is like coercing your child, or maybe you as a parent have just felt that you weren't supported. First of all, I apologize. Second of all, no, it's not how feeding therapy has to be. I know we're going to have time for questions at the end, so I'd love to hear about your own experiences with feeding therapy. So we're going to shift and we're going to talk about feeding tubes for a little bit here. And I'm going to talk for about 10 more minutes because I really want Becca to share her story and I want us to have enough time to keep going. But you probably have never thought about eating in this way, but we all need tubes to eat, right? We all have an esophagus and that is essentially a feeding tube. So we all need tubes to get us to eat, right? We all have an esophagus. Some kids need a different tube to help them learn to eat while their body is healing and growing. So the thing to remember is that children have feeding tubes to provide great nutrition while they are learning the enjoyment of eating, developing confidence, and learning about internal motivation. So we would all prefer kids to learn to eat by mouth. However, there are so many situations where children need feeding tubes to help them take in enough nutrition to be healthy. Tubes can save lives, right? And Becca, you're going to talk about that, how your daughter needed a feeding tube to be a healthy person while her body healed. Tubes can provide calories kids need. They can provide hydration. And we can celebrate tubes even though they were not the dream of the families who received them. And we also, as professionals, And other parents, we can support parents who are learning about tubes, right? We never want someone to feel bad that they ended up with a feeding tube. So when I meet families who have kids with a feeding tube, these are some of the questions that I ask. And we're going to talk about how you might ask these questions for yourself in your own situation. First of all, how is that tube being used? What do I mean by that? Are we using a tube to help a child grow, right? Does the child need the tube to live based on the other medical complexities that they're experiencing? Right? It's a good thing to think about. Because if that's the case, it might change our expectations of what that child is doing in other parts of their life. For example, we know that when kids are being tube fed, they oftentimes have very little appetite because their bellies are full from their tube food or their breast milk or their blend, whatever they're getting, right? So if a tube is being used to provide a child's complete nutrition and hydration, we do not expect that child to eat orally. And it's okay. We're not nervous. We're not worried about helping that child eat. We know that that tube is being used to help the child receive nutrition, and that eating will come when we begin to use the tube in a different sort of way. Second, is a tube helping a child to feel well? What do I mean by that? Feeding tubes should mimic oral eating, and feeding tubes should help kids receive enough nutrition without providing too much nutrition. Feeding tubes should never make a child throw up. If your child has a feeding tube and they're throwing up, it's not okay. Your providers need to be working to end the vomiting. If your providers aren't concerned, it's a problem. 3, do we have realistic growth expectations for the child? It's really common in my work that I meet parents who feel really, really terrible that they have small kids. And there are professionals, well-meaning pediatricians, surgeons, other therapists, dietitians, who are trying everything in their power to help kids grow. And sometimes parents feel terrible that their kids aren't growing as fast as these other people are saying they should grow, or are as big as other people say they should be. So we want to step back and say, what's realistic? Do we have a good picture of what we can expect? Can we make sure the child is safe? And can we celebrate consistent growth at the child's pace? Last tube feeding question I ask: when might a child be finished using a tube, right? We know there's good reasons for kids to receive tubes, to use them well. And at a certain point, we need to say, okay, this was really helpful. And now we are not going to use the tube to help this child grow. We are going to help this child learn to eat by mouth, right? And sometimes it can be tricky to know when that should happen. So first thing we think about with feeding tubes, and I already sort of talked about some of these things, so I'm going to go a little fast, is we need to do no harm. What does that mean? If a child has a feeding tube, we need to support the best of what they're doing. That means if a child is already eating by mouth, we want to support that eating. We don't want to sabotage that eating by putting more food through the tube or by setting up their schedule in such a way that's going to prevent them from eating by mouth. We might consider complementing a nutrition a child is already receiving without taking it over with tube feedings. I could tell you lots of stories of kids that I've met who are, maybe they were bottle drinking, maybe they were eating pouches, and a well-meaning doctor said, they're not big enough, we need to tube feed them. When that child received more tube feeding, they became less interested in eating by mouth. I'm just gonna say that's not okay, right? I'm also gonna say for those, especially moms out there who wanna breastfeed their babies, and maybe their baby is interested in the breast or will latch, that predisposition you have as a mom to breastfeed your baby should be supported. A medical professional should never take that away from you. So it's our job as professionals to be careful, to be sensitive, to support all the good things that are happening, and not to do more harm than we have to, ever. Some of the unintended consequences we see with kids with feeding tubes is that kids might be fed too much, too fast, or on a formula that does not work for them. Again, children should never throw up with a feeding tube. It could be a one-off situation, but not an everyday type of situation. Children who are fed all the time probably aren't hungry. Children may be fed all night and they might not be hungry during the day. That's probably a pretty normal response to being fed all night. The amounts provided through a feeding tube might be too small or they might be too big. Children may lose oral eating when they're being fed through a feeding tube. Sometimes breastfeeding is taken away, which is such a sad thing and should not happen. And the way that we're avoiding unintended consequences is support parents, collaborate closely, and really understand tubes and understand what we're doing with them. And again, this is for professionals, right? When I say we, what we're doing. Okay, so this is a slide for you all. It is never normal for a child to vomit, gag, retch, or be uncomfortable. Your therapist should give you lots of information to help you make an informed choice. And your therapist should listen to you as a parent. They should know exactly what you want, the parts that feel good, the parts that feel hard. Your therapist should be on your team. So when we think about maybe helping kids with tubes have some eating experiences or just mouth experiences in general, I want you to think about looking at this idea of the positive tilt. And the positive tilt is it's an idea that a child is leaning into the experience. Like, oh, that looks good. Or, oh, what do you got on your plate, Mom? And a positive tilt is present when a child is curious, when a child is exploring, when a child has some interest. So I'm going to show you a quick little video of a positive tilt. So this sweet little guy was interested and the parent helped him. They leaned in and they had a moment together. This is a baby who's being tube fed. And I hope that you can see the positive tilt in this one. But this little baby is a lot less certain than that other little guy.
It's another green bean. Yes. You're all about the people. What do you think? Yeah. So he does this a lot where it hangs out like right here. But it doesn't always make it all the way in, depending on.
So he's interested, but he's not really interested. He's exploring in his own way.
Num, 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 num. Some more? You look flirt.
So I'm going to stop that. So you see, the first baby that was the oral eater that really was interested, and this little guy is less interested. But this mom is being so patient. She's giving him the opportunity to explore and to say, hey, this looks kind of good. I love this video. And the mom graciously gave me permission to share it with you all. And we've watched it together a couple of times. And I said, Bethany, Mom, what do you think about when you watch this video? And she says, Karen, I just feel so incredibly nervous because I just don't know if he's going to eat it. And I want him to eat it so much. So I always think about them. So permission could be doing it themselves, right? Putting their fingers in their mouth. Permission could be reaching for the food. Permission could be exploring, right? One of the things I think about a lot, and I think this, I'm going to just do this slide and then two more. The rest you can use for your reference. But, some of the big things I think about when I meet tube-fed kids is that tube feeding can lay the foundation for oral eating. And some of the things that you might think about when you're tube feeding your child is that positioning is really important. If you're tube feeding your child and it feels like a procedure, like you lay your child down, I've seen parents oftentimes will ask parents, show me how you tube feed your child. Show me what they taught you at the hospital. And sometimes it's, we go to the changing table, or we go to the living room floor and we have all the equipment out, and I have to make sure I do everything in the right order, because if I don't, do the right sequence, I get the tube feedings all over, right? It spills or squirts, you guys know. But a tube feeding could happen in a high chair. A tube feeding could happen when a parent is holding a little infant. And that positioning piece can really support the emotional aspects of eating. And it can help a child learn, oh, I'm sitting up and there's food around and I'm using my hands, right? We know that tube feeding can lay the foundation for oral eating when we think about a schedule. It's really common for kids to come home from the hospital, maybe on a tube feeding that lasts all day, right? And I'm just going to say that tube feeding, when they're done well, are transitioned from an all day or an all night experience to a morning tube feeding, and maybe a midday lunch tube feeding, and maybe an afternoon snack tube feeding, right? When kids have the opportunity of experiencing fullness, they take a break. And there's more fullness in their tummy and they take a break. Their bodies are adapting to the typical physiological schedule of eating that we know as people who, are pretty typical eaters in most situations. We can think about giving kids opportunities that help them make the connection between their mouth and their tummy, right? You've probably heard at some point some well-meaning professional saying, always make sure your baby has a pacifier when you tube feed them, right? With the idea that we want kids to understand that something happens to my mouth and my belly gets full, right? And the last thing I want to say is that we really want to think about how we can make tube feedings meal times. So again, positioning can help that happen. People around can help that happen. And the foods that we offer kids can also help that happen. You have this handout from Becca. This is meant to be a resource for parents. So check this handout out. First of all, I'd love to hear what you think. If you have feedback, send it to me. But these are things that I think about a lot when I meet kids who have feeding tubes. And you might use this handout as somewhat of a checklist to think about how you're using the tube and what you might want to change. This can also be a great handout to bring with you to feeding therapy, or maybe like to your pediatrician appointment. Next thing, this is also a handout that you have. It says tube transition plateaus. This is a way that you might conceptualize helping your child go from being a tube fed person to being a person who eats by mouth. In each one of these plateaus is like a step. We're always thinking about starting with trust as the foundation and working our way up the stairs, right? Trust is the foundation. Opportunities build on trust. We help kids become motivated by giving them opportunities to experience hunger and enjoyment. We give kids lots of experiences that help them get good at confidence, getting good at variation. We help them be independent, right? We take the training wheels off. So this is kind of the model that I use when I think about helping kids with feeding tubes. And I encourage you to look at this. Sometimes I encourage parents to like print it out, put it on their fridge. Because if you're a parent who has a baby with a feeding tube and I say baby, I mean child, little one, and you're feeling really, really frustrated, they've had the tube, nothing seems to be getting better, you might say, you know what? My child is medically stable. That's a foundational skill. I am reading my child's cues and providing them pressure-free opportunities that are building trust between me and my child. That is an amazing gift that you're giving your little one. I'm giving my child opportunities, and they really, really love those orange slices that are big because they always put them in their mouth and chew on them, right? That counts. That is a step in the right direction. I know that feeding tubes can just feel hard, can feel like you have it for a long time. But I want you to know that there is hope and there is help and that things can change for you and your child. And Rebecca, I'm going to hand it over to you because you can explain that way better than I can.
Sorry, I have tears in my eyes because I was thinking about when Karen and I first met. Lily had just, she'd been home for, I don't know, about 4 months, 5 months, and we were seeing no progress at all with her feeding therapy. And we were going twice a week to, a hospital where they were an outpatient treatment facility where they were trying to help us. And I finally just had a conversation with one of the nurses and just told her, like, this is not working. My daughter's just, this is not working. She's not responding. In fact, at that point, she was on 24-hour feeds and she was just not interested at all. In fact, she would scream when we came near her with anything. And so she actually referred me to Karen. And I remember the very first meeting that Karen and I had, she made just a few adjustments to the way Lily was sitting in her high chair. That was it. Just a few adjustments to the way she was sitting. She was more comfortable. She was sitting upright. And suddenly she was reaching to the tray. And just like the things that you just don't really think about at the time, and all the pressure that I was putting on myself as well, just because I just wanted her to eat orally. That's just what I wanted. The goal was to get rid of the tube. And while, yes, that can be the end goal, I feel like as parents in general, we just put so much pressure on ourselves that we forget that also the goal is to make sure our child is healthy and thriving and doing well and creating a positive experience. And so I love so much that Karen is here presenting, and actually Erin has joined us, and she is also she also works with Karen with her beautiful son, and which is kind of fun too. So Erin and I met. She's a CDH mom as well, and I refer
Shout out to Erin.
I know, right?
Yeah, Erin.
Here, Karen fan club. But also, I just remember it feeling more relational with Karen. I felt like she wasn't a feeding therapist so much as she was a friend guiding me and showing me how to maybe think about something a little bit differently. So I just want to encourage you guys. I've shared these links. I shared them in the chat. I'll share them also on the CDH Foundation page. So if you haven't gone to our Facebook page and to our website, it's just the cdhfoundation.org. And all of this will be made available there as well. In the Google Drive, you have the handouts that Karen referenced, and you also have the slides as well. But just basically to make a long story short, Lily went from taking absolutely nothing by mouth and screaming when I would come near her to now she eats like a pig. She had her tube removed after less than a year, I think, of working with Karen, and I just never thought that was ever going to happen. And and that would be okay if that was not the case for her. Everybody's situation is different, but I just wanted to let you guys know that I know everybody sometimes feels like you're in the trenches. I know a few of you personally, I've talked with you, and it feels like we're never going to get past this. So just know that that's there, and that she has amazing resources. I also shared the Chicago Feeding Group page and the Get Permission Institute page, so make sure you check out those. Chicago Feeding Group also has several, they have videos available, and they have lots of other things available, resources on their site too. You should check that out. They also have a Facebook page that you can watch too. I wanted really quick to go back to the questions that were asked. The first kind of questions have to do with my daughter likes to chew food, and she likes to suck all the juice out and then she'll spit out the food. Doesn't really matter what kinds of food. She was intubated, she used it to, but her swallow study came back normal. She just won't swallow. Do you have any recommendations?
There is a physiological connection between how kids are being fed, how big they are, and their desire to eat. It's really common for kids to, and think about yourself. Let's start with this. Think about yourself. Maybe you celebrate Thanksgiving or Christmas or holiday where there's like a big meal, and you've eaten like a lot of food. Like you've had the turkey, you've had the mashed potatoes, like you are well fed. And then someone brings out the pumpkin pie and you're like, oh, I love pumpkin pie. I haven't had that all year. I'm going to eat some, right? Maybe you don't eat a lot. Maybe you just like taste it, but like it looks good. And so you put it in your mouth. Kids do that too, right? Kids are physiologically programmed to mouth things, to explore. Maybe they find a taste that they really like. I can think of one little tube fed guy I worked with years ago. I'll never forget him, that he discovered peanut butter. And he like had mouthed a lot of things, but peanut butter was like the gateway food for him. And he just like started like putting peanut butter in his mouth in quantities. So all this to say, there's lots of reasons why kids might be interested or mouth things, even if they're not hungry, right? Even if their tummies are full. And it's great. Like it's normal. We want to celebrate that. But oftentimes the game changer in going from tastes or I'm going to bite it and take it out of my mouth, the game changer is hunger. And so if your little one is being fully tube fed and they're using the tube to help your child grow, I wouldn't necessarily expect that your child has internal motivation to want to eat the food, even if they want to taste it. So a lot of feeding programs, therapists work with a team of folks and they'll systematically decrease your child's calories to help your child experience hunger. And then those tastes will become bigger tastes, will become bites, and will become swallows. If you do this and you think my child is ready, they're showing all this interest and readiness. What I want to tell you is that hunger-based tube feeding works, and it works really well. And I use it all the time. There's lots of groups that do it. But almost always when people maybe don't have as much experience or you're doing it with your local provider, it takes longer than everyone thinks for kids to really begin to eat a quantity of food. It usually takes somewhere between, again, it depends on a lot of factors, how big your child is, how long it takes for them to get hungry, the way that they were being tube fed previously. But I mean, it can take up to a week of a serious caloric reduction before your child begins to show interest and start eating. So what I want to tell you is if your child is interested in tasting and not eating quantities, hunger could be the missing piece. And work with folks who know hunger, who are familiar with feeding tube transitions. Sometimes you might hear them called feeding tube weans, right? Tube weans. And those folks can help you. We do this at my office. It's myself. We're going to have a new therapist working with me. I'm so excited. And I'm a couple dietitians. And so we do this a lot. And we know how it's supposed to work because we've done it over and over and over again. And what I want to tell you is it's actually like faster than you think. And in most cases, the result, like the things that happen are like pretty predictable. So it's possible that could be the answer to your question.
I love that you mentioned that you have dietitians that work with you, because I feel like that was one of the biggest game changers, was having a feeding therapist and a dietitian together. Because I mean, Amy Manilowski was our dietitian, and she monitored everything, and she was just a text message away when something was happening with Lily. She was throwing up, or she was not eating, or she was getting stopped up. Our kids have lots of GI issues, right? And so I was able to just send her a message and she would answer right. I don't know, that meant the world to me, because I felt like we weren't super disconnected. So it's just something to think about if you're shopping for a feeding therapist. Okay, so the next one's around picky eating. Do you have any suggestions on how to help kids eat more nutritional foods? Is it just the way that they're served or presented, or depends on the kid?
So I just want to say, I mean, I think that one of the hardest parts about feeding a child, either a tube fed child or just like a oral eating child, is that, eating is one of the places in life where kids can exert control, right? We always like joke at the office, like kids can have control over eating, sleeping, and pooping, right? They're going to do what they're going to do. And so I think that in some situations, a child's preferences for food are one of the first times that parents really begin to feel like, oh, wow, I can't control what's happening. My child is going to do what they're going to do. They're their own person. You as a parent are there to provide opportunities, to provide love, right? To support your child, because we know that kids learn through opportunities. So one of the things that we think about is how can we help kids be a part of food opportunities that are safe and feel good while still providing variety. So for example, maybe you as a parent are eating a Caesar salad for dinner and there's green vegetables on your plate. Could your child, who maybe is slightly picky and would never in a million years eat a Caesar salad, maybe that child could use some child tongs and like put the lettuce on your plate, right? Maybe your 3-year-old who doesn't like fruits and vegetables could help by putting the strawberries in the blender, getting them away and putting them in the blender and watching all the yogurt in the bottom splash up, right? It's a food opportunity that might be kind of interesting, feel kind of good, be a fun thing to do together with a loving caregiver, and also give that child a food experience. Oh, I'm learning that the strawberries are bumpy. Oh, I'm learning that I can kind of throw them in and they make a plopping noise, right? No one is pressuring a child to eat. No one is making a child do something that feels uncomfortable, but we're gently supporting that child and having food opportunities. The second thing I'm going to say in response to this question, and this might be like a slightly adjacent question, but I think it's worthwhile to go there, is that pressure can really dampen interest. And pressure is the thing that will sabotage your efforts in helping your child love food. So if you as a parent feel pressure on yourself, or you feel like you're pressuring your child to do things, I want you to just give yourself permission. First of all, recognize it. Give yourself permission to say, you know what? We are not going to pressure the child. I'm not going to say bad things to myself as a parent. I'm going to say loving things to myself because I can't control this. And it's really, really, really hard. So think about where there might be pressure and then think about how you might hit the release valve on the pressure to make feeding feel better for you and your child.
Next question was, how do I get my child to be ready for oral feeds? A lot of kids, especially those who've been intubated, have a really bad gag reflex, especially kids who have been NG tube fed. You have to go at them with some tubes. They don't want you coming anywhere near them. How do we prepare them?
Yeah, I just want to say, thank you for asking this question. This is a great question. It's interesting because historically, kids with feeding tubes have had a lot of things done to them. They've had people massage their faces and get like little vibrating probes and put them in their child's mouth. And I feel like kids with feeding tubes have had a lot of things come at them historically, because therapists, people like me, have said, well, we need to make sure that the child can move their tongue and we need to put things in that child's mouth so they desensitize it, And what I really am coming to learn in my practice more and more is that we need to think about typical development as our guide. What does that mean? Maybe you have another child, maybe your friends have kids. And in typical development, kids have a lot of control over their mouth. Maybe they put their fingers in their mouth, maybe they put a pacifier in their mouth. Maybe they kind of never put a pacifier in their mouth because some kids just like don't gravitate towards that. And it's totally and completely okay. But we need to think about how can we help that child have some control over their own body in a way that feels kind of good around their mouth. It could be that maybe the thing that feels kind of good is when a parent comes up and gives them a little kiss on the cheek, maybe it's not like a full kiss because that might be too much for sensitive kids, but it's just like a face rub, right? Face touch. That would be a great place to start, right? We don't need to be doing things to get into kids' mouths. We don't need to be like vibrating them with probes and things. We really just need to give kids experiences to feel safe and to feel comfortable. we might do our best to identify things that kind of feel like typical development. Maybe a child will bring, like that little guy in the video who had the little teeter spoon. That guy was putting him in his mouth at his own pace. He was sitting in his high chair. He was proud. He was with his mom, but no one was saying, we have to put this in your mouth. We have to get it in there. Almost always what happens is that when kids are ready to transition off of their feeding tube, when we reduce the amount of food that goes through their tube, kids begin mouthing things more. And maybe what made them gag earlier doesn't make them gag. So the longer I do this work, the more I learn that there is a physiological connection between your tummy and your mouth. And when we change the way we tube feed a child, we can help that connection to emerge in a different sort of way. So what I want to say to that mom is, right now, if you're tube feeding your baby and they're gagging, I would wonder why they're gagging. I would wonder if maybe the tube feeding schedule, volume, rate, type of food, maybe it needs to be changed so that baby is more comfortable. When I meet kids who are like really gaggy and really full, sometimes those kids are being overfed. I don't want to say that for sure because I don't know, but that would be a question I would have, right? And then what I would tell you is that don't feel like you need to pressure your child to do certain things to get their mouth ready. The other thing I'm going to say is maybe the most important thing that you can do to help your child transition off of their feeding tube is include them in a family meal. Again, do it in a developmentally appropriate way. Do it in a way that feels good for you. You and your partner are having burgers or burritos. You sit your little one down, you eat your burger, your little one's like, what's going on, right? They're learning they can sit up. They're learning that the food goes in your mouth. They're learning how things smell, right? They're learning that they can talk and have someone respond to them, right? Literature tells us that including your tube-fed child at the table is one of the best things that you can do to help them get ready to be an eater themselves.
It's one of the first adjustments that we made, which at the time Lily was fed 24/7, so it didn't feel like an important thing to have her, at the table, like, because she was being fed all the time. But I remember bringing her to the table with us, and it just felt like a very normal, typical thing to do. You eat as a family, if you can. And I don't know, it felt really good. And also to the food question, I remember we tried purees with Lily, and she just didn't like purees. One of her first foods that she loved was guacamole, not avocado, guacamole. So this question has to do with baby-led weaning. Do you feel like that is the best way to introduce foods? And if so, at what point should you start introducing water, and how much? Do you prefer a cup or a straw? So it's like a two-part question.
So I just want to say baby-led weaning is fascinating to me. As a concept, I like baby-led weaning. I think it's great. The idea that we are letting babies be in charge of feeding themselves. We're giving them autonomy. We're giving them experiences. Like, it's amazing, right? But what I want to say is that I'm a feeding therapist. I work in a clinic, and people come to me when they've tried baby-led weaning and it hasn't worked, right? So if you are a mom who spends a lot of time on Instagram accounts, and I just want to say, I spend a lot of time on Instagram accounts because I think Instagram is fascinating. It's kind of my guilty pleasure. Don't tell anyone. If you spend a lot of time on Instagram accounts, like you have an idea of like how it should work, and you might not have an idea of how you can adapt an experience, especially if it's not going well. So some of the things I really like about baby-led weaning is that babies get to be the ones to feed themselves. And we know that in the tube-fed crowd, oftentimes kids do not like it when other people feed them, right? They want to do it themselves. Second thing is that, there's a lot of parts of baby-led weaning that can be really beneficial in helping kids build sensory enjoyment and build skills. What do I mean? Picking up pieces, right? Oh, I get to figure out that mango is kind of slippery, and I don't know if I like it, but it's kind of interesting. So I'm going to try it on my own, right? Those are valuable learning experiences. I also love that in baby-led weaning, they are really supportive of giving kids big pieces of hard foods to chew on, which is so good when it comes to helping kids learn to move their tongue to the side, get really good at biting and chewing. And those are like great things that I support as a therapist. I think that some of the things that feel tricky about baby-led weaning is that parents are really, really worried about kids having a scary experience. Because you're giving kids more independence. You're giving kids more independence maybe earlier on. And I think that sometimes kids aren't always ready for those opportunities, right? Or maybe things feel a little bit unexpected. I also see kids in my practice who parents have gone through the steps because they know the steps, they've read the books, they've seen the Instagram accounts. And so maybe parents have gone a little bit faster than what kids are ready for because they've got someone in their ear saying at 9 months, your baby should be eating this food, right? You've all seen the infographics, right? Like 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. And I'm just going to say, every child is an individual and sometimes kids need more time. Not bad at all. It just means that you're going at your child's pace. My professional mentor is someone named Marcia Duncline. I have to give a shout out to Marcia whenever I talk because she's really my inspiration and the person who taught me a lot of what I know. And she always says, Karen, as adults, we set the direction and children are the ones to set the pace. You should never let an Instagram account trip you up and forget that, right? We set the direction, kids set the pace. So if you're trying baby-led weaning and there are certain parts of it that you love that seem to be working for your baby, awesome, go for it. If you're trying baby-led weaning and you feel like, I just want to give my baby puree on a spoon because that's the thing that they seem to like, and my baby needs a little bit of help, go for it. Like, change it, adapt. I give you permission to do the thing that seems right for your child because that's what it means to be a responsive feeding parent. The last thing I'm going to say is there is a person out there. Her name is Jill Rabin, Rabin. She has a fabulous Instagram. She also has a book called Adapted Baby-Led Weaning. And if you're looking for more resources on how to make baby-led weaning work for you, I direct you to Jill. Jill's also from Chicago. She's a speech language pathologist. She's a good friend. And she has some really, really excellent resources. She's got a couple talks in the Chicago Feeding Group. And her work might be the missing piece that you need.
That's great. I'm gonna link them while we ask the next question.
Yeah.
We just have 2 more, and then I was gonna, if you don't mind, we'll just have just a few minutes for anybody to jump in
Totally.
To ask questions. Okay. So this next one was, but this child struggles with weight gain. 9 months old, no G-tube. They still offer him 5 bottles a day and solids 1 to 2 times a day. They've been told that breast milk and formula has more calories. But do you feel like that amount is interfering with the solids that he is eating? That's preventing him actually from orally eating.
I'm going to give you some general things to think about. One thing to think about is that, it sounds like the person that asked this question is feeling worried about their child's growth. When I meet kids, almost always they're having a hard time eating or they're small or both. And the thing I always think about is that child following their own curve? Are they on their own trend? So, when I meet kids, I always ask for their growth chart and I always want to see their height and their weight plotted against each other. I'm less interested in what percentile they fall into. One of the things that you all don't know about me because you haven't met me in person is that I'm super tall. I'm almost always the tallest woman in the room. Sometimes I'm the tallest person in the room. I'm about 6 feet tall. So what this means for my own growth chart is that I have been in like the 99th percentile for my entire life, at least for height. This does not make me an overachiever. It doesn't make me better than anyone who is shorter than I am. It just means that those are the genes that I have. And when you look at everyone else in my family, we look about the same, right? We're all tall people. I share this with you because the same thing could be said of kids who are short or kids who are small, right? 1% of people in the population should be in the first percentile, and that's normal and right for them. So if you have a medical professional that's really pushing for growth, the question I have is, could we focus on helping that child grow in a way that's consistent for them as an individual? Oftentimes, professionals use words like catch-up growth. You know, we want the child to jump percentiles, to get bigger. And I am not a dietitian, but I know from experience that we feed kids best when they grow slowly and they grow steadily at their own pace. A dietitian who has experience with kids with feeding tubes is going to be your ally in helping you figure out the answer to this question. I'm also just going to say that there are lots of metrics that help us think about, is this child doing well? Is this child being fed in a way that, you know, makes sense for them? And weight and growth is one of those outcome measures. But I'm just going to say there are other outcome measures you might think about as well. For example, does the child have energy? Do they seem healthy? Are they throwing up all the time, right? Are they attempting to play on the playground at school, right? Are they getting sick all the time, right? These are all things that we kind of like think about. We don't want to get just really caught up in a child's growth and kind of like miss the big picture. The last thing I'm going to say is this person asks about, you know, do I think that this is the best way to feed this child? We know that kids who are under 1 year of age, you might have heard the expression, food under one is just for fun. I kind of love that expression and I kind of hate it at the same time for a variety of reasons. But you should know that if you're offering your child under one experiences with solids, it should be to help that child learn, right? It should be fun, it should be going at your child's own pace. There should be an emphasis on allowing the child to explore in ways that feel safe and good for them. So if you as the parent feel pressure or you feel like those feeding experiences have to be aimed at getting a quantity of food in a child, I would say that you maybe want to step back and really think about why you're offering that child food, solids, and how you might just kind of lower the expectations for yourself, maybe for the child, and take some of the pressure out of those feeding experiences.
I know we had a couple of other people that wanted to ask some questions. I don't know. I know, Kaylin, you had mentioned you had something. I didn't know if you'd had a chance to submit. Did you want to? This is a Kaylin CDH star, by the way, if you want to introduce him.
Yes, this is Luca. Do you want to say hi? No. Okay.
He's like,
No, don't say hello.
No. I do know. I was thinking this earlier. I'm like, oh my gosh, whatever question I gave Becca is like no longer, I think. He actually has not had a tube feed in 2 months.
Wow.
But we will have it for a very long time. So they did kind of change. So we'll have it for a while. He also has an ileostomy. So whenever he gets sick, even just a cold, for things that happen with the ostomy, he will lose in literally a day and a half. He'll lose 2 pounds, even with no vomiting or anything. So I'll go back to, we've had periods of time where we haven't used this tube, and then he gets sick, and then I have to use this tube again. So my question on this, and I was thinking earlier, you know, the next time he gets sick, do I have to bolus him a little bit or give him his overnight feed? What is your, let me look at how I wrote this. If we're not tube feeding, what is your advice on weight loss for when I should start those feeds back up? I was going off of 10%. If he lost 10% of his healthy weight, what he was that day ago or 2 days ago, if he lost 10%, I would start a tube feed back up. Do you have any?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts. So, you know, one thing I think about in general is that when kids are tube fed, their growth curve is artificially curated, I don't know, artificially written by the people who are tube feeding the child, right? Because, you know, there's an external person saying, we're doing our best to figure out, this is about how much food you need. And so the growth, you're doing your best to make sure the growth chart seems about right, is heading in the right direction, not going too fast, all those things. Oftentimes when we allow kids to eat by mouth, what happens is that that growth chart, it continues to trend in the same way, but it just goes down, maybe like a little. Not in all situations. In some situations, we've done a great job as people figuring out this is about how big your body wants to be. But again, in some situations, it changes. So I share this with you because, you know, if you have a child who is now orally eating for 2 months, first of all, congratulations. It's amazing.
Thank you.
It's a huge success. But you might look at those last 2 months of points on the growth chart and see if his curve has changed at all. Because you're saying if he lost this much, you know, I don't want him to lose, you know, 10% of whatever number you're using. My question would be, I wonder what number you're using. And I wonder if he's just meant to be smaller than maybe you anticipated, right? I don't know. That is an honest question. The second thing I was going to say, and this is maybe slightly more of like a practical thing, is that tubes are tools. And I never want a parent to feel bad about going back to using the tube if they haven't used it for a while, if there's like a specific reason. And one of those reasons is an illness, right? So, you know, if he's really sick, like if he got COVID or RSV, because all of those things have been going around the past year in terrible ways, you can feel free to, you know, give him Pedialyte, give him water, give him a bolus feeding here or there. It's meant to be a support. And you can think about using it more as like supplementation rather than saying, oh, we're going back to tube feeding is like the primary thing. And I think when you think about it as like, we're using it as a supplement, or we're sometimes in my mind, I think about it like, oh, we're just going to top you off. We're just going to give you a little bit.
Yeah.
I think that's a different way of thinking about tube feeding. And I think when you think about it in that sort of way, it can, you're not like sabotaging all the progress you've made. But you're just like using it in a gentle sort of way to keep him healthy and safe.
I love that. And I think I laughed at the top you off because we've done that. When we took away, we weaned pretty aggressively without guidance. And it worked for us and it was great. Hang on one second, baby. But I would, once I finally took it all away, our overnight feed, I would replace just a little bit at night twice before I went to bed. And I would say to my husband, you know, you just top him off before, just push a little bit in before we go to bed. No, that's a great thing to think about instead of like percentages or like he doesn't have to be at that mark. He's just right. Like my 5-year-old, I can't top him off when he's sick. So
yeah. I'm also going to say it's completely normal for kids to lose weight when they're sick, which is how it works. It's also, in a lot of situations, we see kids gain that weight back maybe over like 2 months after they've recovered, again, depending on how long they were sick and how much they lost.
Maybe just a question on how I could word something, or if I should not just stop saying his water intake. There are many days where he's not getting that in, or I'm chasing him around with his cup. There are some days he can do it. I know he can drink 12 ounces or whatever. And I'll say, if you don't, I'm going to have to put it in your tube. And sometimes he'll say, no, don't put it in my tube, or okay, give me that cup. And it sounds negative. Well, if you don't do this, then I'm just going to, it's negative towards the tube, but I'm giving that option. Okay, well, if you don't want to, gonna have to put it in your tube. And I think to myself, whenever I say it, gosh, I don't know if I should be saying this, but how do I get it through to him? I'm gonna have to use your tube. I don't know how to ask, but
great question.
Sentence sounds negative.
Yeah. So one of the things I think about is, I've worked with a lot of dietitians over the years, and I love the fact that dietitians are so good at giving us guidelines of what we should be doing as eaters, right? And I'm going to tell you, the dietitians I work with are so good at giving us just guidelines for hydration. If you were to look at me on any given day and see how much water I drank, I probably don't hit the mark most days, right? Because it's really easy to not drink as much as we're supposed to. In tube-fed kids, rather than having a volume goal, and you could have a volume goal for water, it might make more sense to think about, can you monitor his hydration based on, does he have wet diapers or is he urinating, right? And then also, how is his stooling? Because we know that oftentimes stools change when kids' hydration goes down, right? Stools become harder. If you are a mom who is like very meticulously calculating his water intake, it might be interesting to step back a little bit and just kind of say, hey, how would you do if I didn't keep track of it in this very, strategic sort of way? Other things you can do that help kids get hydration is there lots of purees that have water. Like if he's a yogurt drinker, he could have yogurt drinks. You could have water. There's like a ton of water in that sort of puree. There's a lot of water in foods like applesauce, right? Fruit and vegetable purees. There's a lot of water in certain foods. If you think about melons and berries, and you can find lists of foods with high water content. So I share this with you because one of the questions I would have is, would it be possible for him to eat enough and for you to offer water so you wouldn't necessarily have to just say, if you don't drink this, I'm going to tube you, right? That would be one question, is overall, could he do it? Some kids can, some kids aren't ready yet. So it's an honest question. The second thing I wonder is if you're like, no, lady, like he really needs the water. Like I have no doubt, which again, could be the case. You might think about giving him different options of how he drinks the water, right? Again, it could be mixed into a fruit puree, it could be in a pouch. Or, you could just say, do you want mouth water or tummy water, right? It's your choice. You can put it in your mouth or put it in your tummy, right? Or some days it might be, I'm going to give you, we're going to do mouth water and tummy water and mouth water and tummy water. I've done that with kids where it's a mouth snack and a tummy snack, right? Because they're both ways that you can receive nutrition. Mm-hmm. So I think that might be a way that you could offer it and just make the whole thing feel, I don't know, maybe more positive or even just like more neutral.
And again, him having the control. Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's not bad. He has a tube, right?
Yeah.
It's a tool.
No, I like that. That's a great way to think of it. I did want to, in case people listen to this in the future, your points of the medical stability is, as you know, and as you said, so important. That was part of our issue with oral eating, is he had this undiagnosed other defect from his CDH. And our OT was our feeding therapist. And she just, at one point, she just said, something's got to be wrong. I've never gotten a kid to not eat. And it was, once we got that medical stability and he could get some weight on from the health, he would start eating. He would start trying things. So that, in my experience, for people, if they come back and watch the recording, that was true for myself. Find something, if you have notions that something's going on, and you guys can't get them feeding, that's got to be checked out.
Could you share what that was? I'm interested to hear.
Yes, he also has total colonic Hirschsprung's disease.
Oh yeah.
So he was undiagnosed until 20 months. Doctors just kept adding the lactulose and the senna and the Miralax and all these things, and still was not going. So eventually he got incredibly ill. He started refeeding the electrolytes and all that jazz. So once we got that figured out and he got his ostomy, he took off, and I mean, took off. We're in the second percentile, which I know I don't bother with either of the percentiles, but yeah, so he has CDH and total colonic Hirschsprung's and is mostly good with food. He's got the typical toddler, some days they're going to have a granola bar type thing.
That was a good point that you made, though, that so often one of the problems with eating has less to do about motivation and more of there's an undiagnosed condition. So it's very important to have a medical team kind of, listening to you.
Yeah.
Well as,
And I've had that. I've had that happen as well. There was one little guy I'm thinking about who got off of his feeding tube. He had eaten by mouth for maybe 8 months and just stopped. And we thought, oh, this is not normal. And he had testing done, and he had a laryngeal cleft that no one had caught.
oh, wow.
So yeah.
Here's just one more for you. And this was while we were like starting our wean and everything. So I don't think this is one I worry about right now, but I think maybe a lot of people could relate to it. Will bolusing after a small meal, if I didn't feel he ate enough in that meal, would that hinder oral motivation? Could that ruin the oral motivation for the next meal?
Just want to say this is a very complicated question.
Okay.
No, it's a great question, but there's different ways that we think about inducing hunger in kids. I am a fan of making sure that the bolus feedings we're giving the child are supporting oral eating. Also, I'm a fan of, if we're transitioning from a tube-fed kid to an oral-fed kid, I would argue that we are reducing the amount of food that we're giving through the tube, and we're allowing that child to eat. I like to do it that way because that means we know that kids are hungry because we're giving them less through their tube. And also, we as the outside adults aren't like adjusting the tube feedings every day. We just know you get 3 ounces after dinner, right? Or whatever it is. It sounds like this person is maybe keeping track of how much their baby is eating by mouth, and then they're tube feeding the rest to try to like hit a magic number. And some people work that way. Personally, I think that's not the best approach, because that means that a parent is really vigilant, doing their best to calculate how much that child eats. And we know that can be stressful. And then second of all, we know that it's just like, it's hard to do, right? Like you can be wrong. So if you're always like eyeballing quantities, I would say work with a dietitian, figure out how much your kid needs through their tube, and then give them experiences to eat by mouth and see how they do, right? Wait a week, wait 2 weeks, reassess the situation, and then make changes going from there. Because I really think that, when I work with families, one of my priorities is making sure that parents feel good and parents feel confident and parents don't feel stressed about their child's weight, about the way that they're offering at meal times. And I think that if you're always monitoring what your child is eating, that can feel really hard.
I agree.
Yeah, I don't think I've noticed quite as much how over the top I feel like I was with Lily until I had my son. And just, it is baby led, right? And in so many ways, like he tells me when he's hungry and when he's, not. Some days he'll eat 5 avocados, and some days he'll eat a Triscuit, and it's different, right? And I don't know, so I think I'm just going to honor Karen's time, and thank you so much for joining us tonight, Karen. I know this is going to be a huge resource for all the people in our community.
I love this. Thank you so much for joining with us.